Hello and welcome to One on One. I am Cyril Stober. The Nigerian government strives to grow a strong and robust economy, ensuring that the country's business environment is enabled to attract investment, support local enterprise, and ease access to global markets. The government organ whose goal is to drive this policy is the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. Today, our attention is on key aspect of the ministry's mandate, but that will be after this message. Joining me now is the Minister of State Industry, Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, Senator John Enoh. Minister, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Cyril.
Right. Let's start off from the very name of the ministry, the nomenclature. That tends to be a little bit confusing to so many people. The Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. But then you superintend over other aspect, that is industry, as Minister of State Industry. Could you explain exactly how this works out?
Okay, thanks, Cyril. Rather than being confusing, I think that in itself, what it depicts is the size of the ministry in terms of, you're talking about industry, of trade and investment. So each of these really, could stand separately on their own. And in the course of Nigeria's history, we've had to go through periods in which you had Ministry of Industry as a ministry on its own. You had Ministry of Trade and Investment as a ministry of its own. And if you were to go to the area one, where old secretariat, where the ministry is located, you're going to see this, very clear, that the ministry as it is now has 4 blocks. To the right, you have 2 that are industry blocks. To the left, you have 2 that are trade and investment blocks. And, when the president started, his tenure, he actually had one minister who was in charge of industry, trade and investment. But again, I think that, and I've said it here and there, it has largely to do with the hallmark of President Tinubu's leadership. After a year plus, I think that there was a consideration that the large size of that ministry was such that it needed more than one minister. And I think that was also because a lot of the times with industry, trade and investment, the tendency to have a focus on one of those mandates, to the exclusion of the other, is always very high. So when Mr. President rejigged his cabinet, I was moved from Ministry of Sports Development as minister to a Minister of State in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, and given the mandate for industry, which is why you also find out that, in this intro, it said that the Minister of State for Industry in the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment.
All right, so fantastic. That means that this is a huge ministry with huge responsibilities attached to them. Of course, it speaks to what your mandate is here. We have called this conversation to do with Nigeria's industrial growth. That has not been very good in the past few years, has it?
Oh, well, I agree with you. It's each of the times that the Bureau of Statistics has come up with various sectoral contributions to the country's GDP. The contribution of industry and manufacturing has just been minimal, right? It's been always, so you are right. And this remains so even when you find out that across the world, countries that have achieved economic development, if you look at, the distribution in terms of sectoral contributions, those countries where manufacturing and industry has contributed or contributes the most to that GDP are also incidentally countries that are seen as economically developed. What it means is that it doesn't seem that it's possible that a country can attain economic development and prosperity without getting its industrial sector right. So you're right. And incidentally, we didn't start like this. I mean, in the 70s, of course, we had thriving, in industries and companies and manufacturing concerns. And we've had to lose that in the course of the several years, and all of that. I mean, the hope is that we can get back to rediscover that past and to have it play and work for country.
Well, hoping that we can recover and push ahead. So, are you daunted by what you see on ground?
Whether I'm daunted? Well, yes, because it's challenging. I mean, I remember one of the first things that I did, after I got to the ministry, was to appreciate the fact that the stakeholders in Nigeria's industrial sector, of course, you have Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, you have NASIMA, you have NASMI, you have NASI, you have a whole lot of that. You have the, organized private sector OPS. And I organized a stakeholders session because I thought that I needed to meet with them, because I thought very early that partnership and collaboration was going to be the way out of, what I found, in the sector. And I remember one of the things that I said was that it's a no mean job to be pushing for industry at a moment of severe constraints, not just constraints in industry, but national constraints. I mean, at better times, and we've had better times, we lost it, but we are now at a time in which, those constraints are there. We're at a time in which, the public, the Nigerian people, have had to make up with so much in the past, and it does appear that for this government, the expectations of Nigerians are quite high. Mr. President has shown courage from day one when he was sworn in. And I think that for all of us who have the privilege, to be part of his cabinet, we also have to demonstrate courage in tackling and confronting, whatever we find and whatever we found where we've been assigned to.
So what are the strategies that you'd be adopting to address these critical areas?
Okay, I think that, again, I refer you to the stakeholders meeting that I had very early, and I think that one of the strategies is that there must be collaboration and partnership. This is also a sector that will do well or not, depending on how much the private sector is recognized, is appreciated, and how much it performs and functions. So collaboration and partnership is key. One of the things that I've discovered is that currently we don't have an industrial policy, right? And not because efforts have not been made in the past. Efforts have been made in the past. One of the sessions I had with UNIDO talked about how much they helped, they assisted trying to get out an industrial policy. And it got to a point, last minute, man, said they weren't carried along. And for me, this was a bit strange. You can't have an industrial policy for country, and Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, it doesn't make an input to that kind of policy. So that's what I'm talking about. The way to go about it and tackle that is that at every step on the way, you have to know what matters. You have to know how much it matters and affects, the industry players. So on that day, I announced the setting up of an Industrial Revolution Work Group, IRWG, where I'm chairman of that IRWG, and the president of MAN is the co-chairman, and you have, the different leaderships of NASMI, of NASIMA, of OPS, and all of that being members. And then back in the ministry, you have all agencies that are industry related, because, with the separation of mandates into industry and trade and investment, what followed too was the separation of agencies. So that the ministry had about, close to 20 or so agencies. So they were divided into the two mandates. Industry related agencies, were, under my mandate. And, so all the chief executives of the agencies that are under my mandate. And we also looked at ministries that, continue to play a role. In the Ministry of Finance has a representative. The Customs, the CG Customs has a representative. The Ministry of Power, and all of this is driven by what? Those issues that remain challenges. Ministry of Finance, you're going to talk about, what incentives are available, and all. So the Industrial Revolution Work Group has been part of, the strategies that, that we've adopted. There is hands-on leadership. We've tried to encourage our agencies, to be able to speak to the various performance indicators that drive the agencies. We're also in a government where the president takes, the performance bonds that each of the ministers has signed, very, very seriously. The special advisor, coordinating that, Hadiza is doing a great job. And I think that job she's doing keeps all of us, our toes. Back in the ministry, we've also had to cascade that our agencies also have, performance bonds that they have signed. So all of this, continues to matter. And I think that in the last meeting, visual meeting of the Industrial Revolution Work Group, what we've tried to do is to come up with 5 or 6 thematic areas, and see how we can distribute the membership along those areas in terms of what we expect to happen.
All right, and so that's what we'll talk about in just a moment after this message. Well, thanks for staying with us. Well, Minister, you did talk about agencies which you superintend over, and some of them would be key to achieving the goals that you've set out to do, and especially with the Industrial Revolution Work Group that you've put in place. So let's hear about some of them and what key contributions they are doing towards attaining this goal. Okay,
I think that, those key contributions will also be driven by, the kind of agency. Okay. You have the Bank of Industry, BOI. BOI is one of those agencies. And of course, I think that, the past work of the BOI, and especially its present work and performance, has made BOI almost to be a household name, I dare say, in our country. One of its bragging rights is its ability, to give out, funds, funding for industries, for and all of that, in single-digit interest rates. If you imagine, for example, that, the present interest rates, which the president is working very hard to bring down, is about, close to 30%, and then Bank of Industry, is intentionally created to be able to provide succor to our budding business people and manufacturers, small and medium enterprises, companies, manufacturers, industries, and all of that. And I think that very early in the administration, the president had made available about 200 billion, that was, supposed to be, shared on, 50 billion for nano as grants, nano businesses, 75 billion for small and medium, industries, and then another 75 billion for manufacturing. So the Bank of Industry, has a critical role in terms of whether we're going to be able to achieve our purpose or not. If you leave the Bank of Industry, you're talking about NADDs. NADDs is National Automotive, Design and Development Council. And the auto industry, the automotive sector is under the NADDC. Just a few times, they've come up with quite a lot. Nigeria's auto industry is what we have to get right. When I talked about the fact that we've had a glorious past, your guess as good as mine in terms of, a thriving auto industrial base. But we've lost that, and I think that other countries have gone ahead of us. At some point in the 70s, we were at the same level with South Africa. South Africa today has a saturated auto market. They export, and Morocco has the same. In a chance meeting, one of the meetings that I traveled abroad for, I met with, the Secretary General of the African, Continental Free Trade Area, who said, look, that the rest of Africa is waiting for Nigeria, because Morocco and South African auto markets are saturated. So that's what it is. So that agency is key. to our ability to be able to bring back that past and to be able to now see how we can, get it better. You have SMIDAN. SMIDAN is Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency. Its mandate is clear, and all of that. The businesses, just as the name implies, and I think that, okay, the mainstay of Nigeria's economy, is those small and medium enterprises, SMEs. SMEs, the number is close to about 40 million. Their contribution is close to 90%, and all of that. So when you have an agency like SMIDAN, that is in charge of that, you can imagine how key it is. We have the National Sugar Development Council. I can go on and on, and all of these are...
Yeah, but one very important aspect you talked about earlier on, the partnership in constituting the Industrial Revolution Work Group.
Yes, please.
You did mention about power. And that brings me to the question of the small and medium enterprises whose businesses might be affected by the power crisis that the country faces. And so what is the approach to that? Since you've incorporated power into the strategies of achieving your goals, how are you addressing that for the millions of small and medium enterprises who are facing real tough times?
And I think that that constraint and that challenge informed the need to have power ministry, be part of our Industrial Revolution Work Group. The idea of the work group is, it's a high-level, work group that variously I've called that is a war cabinet, because I think that is the situation that we are in, and I think that if we must make progress, we need to approach it like that, just so that we can have hands-on approach, when problems come, they can be sorted. But I think that quite specifically, given our present power situation, which is improving by the way, right? And, it's not going to take 1 day, 2 days. It's going to take a while. If you look at the fact of when you make an investment in this sector and how long it's going to take for it to come to life, what it means is that you cannot wait for that to happen for you to be able to tackle the power problem that affects our small and medium scale enterprises. We have what we call the IDCs. IDC is Industrial Development Centers. Right? And I think that what we are doing is promoting the idea of industrial clustering. IDCs were formerly within the ministry itself, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. But IDCs have now been transferred to SMEDAN. Because I think that, they are closer to them. And I think that they know, so the idea is that when industries and all of these medium-scale enterprises are clustered together, they're able to benefit from common services. They're able to, whatever power demands or requirements are consolidated, and I think that they can all benefit. And I think that going forward, it appears that this is what we're going to keep promoting until such a time that we have enough power and people can then, set up their small enterprises and all that wherever they want. So that's it.
All right. Well, at this point, we'll take another of our messages and we'll return with more on developing Nigeria's industrial base. Stay with us.
Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Right, Minister, it's interesting that we talk about all the efforts that are going in to ensure that the very bedrock of the economy, the small and medium enterprises, are surviving. But however, we look at the big players as well, and the fact that, as you mentioned earlier on, Nigeria did so well with the various industries, giants who unfortunately have now had to scale down, and some have even left off. Is there anything in the horizon to give Nigerians hope under this administration that this shutdown would stop and the growth would begin again? Because easily, this might be just popular opinion, but you do hear stories of, oh, XYZ company, they're shutting down, they're moving their operations out of Nigeria, they cannot continue, they're operating at huge losses. Does that worry you a lot?
Okay, I think that the statistics in itself would seem to also answer to that. What do I mean? And it is true that, companies have closed shop, the companies have to move away out of the country and all of that. But Cyril, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has been president for, in a few months' time, it will be 2 years. Go check how many industries or companies have closed shop and left. I think that that challenge has been more of the past. And what's responsible? I think that the renewed confidence in the steps that this administration has taken. Those steps are courageous and bold steps, which is what the Nigerian leadership requires. So that is working. The other thing is that, okay, I remember again, and I'm going to keep referring you to the session I had with the organized private sector and all of that. Speaker after speaker didn't fail to commend the fact that Mr. President had decided to give them their own minister. I've mentioned in the course of this program that because of the sheer size of the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, you are going to have a minister, if there's only one minister, concentrating either in trade and investment, all of that issues without, while ignoring or paying very scant attention to industrial matters. So there is a minister whose assignment is for industry. And I think that in the course of the work we've tried to do so far and the engagement so far, we are in constant and regular touch with those companies because we also need to continue to reassure them. Some weeks back, I started what I call a national industrial push, that is intended to take me around the country, visit industries and manufacturing concerns, speak with them. The problems are almost, everybody knows them, but I think that the fact of having that kind of interface with them, continues to be encouraging to these companies and these industries, right? So we've tried to do so. So what I can say is that from what I see, from what I find, and from what I'm determined to do, I think that I can say that the ecosystem of industry, I can say that the confidence that I find and about the kinds of things we want to do and about the kinds of problems that we're determined to solve. One of the things, for example, that I got confronted with was the fact that there was a backlog of forex forward contracts with the CBN, amounted to about $2.something billion. And I can report, that just some few weeks ago, in a meeting with the governor of Central Bank, I got, very positive assurances, that efforts had actually begun even before that meeting, because the issue was that, yes, there are some of these manufacturers that, have infractions and all of that. But why don't you separate those that don't have, so not everybody gets punished? So a lot of work is going on, and we'll continue to go on to continue to reassure, our big, manufacturers, because they matter. We need them. We need to expand and deepen our productive base. If we can't produce, one of the former presidents had said in answer to a question about what we needed to do, he named 3 things. He said production, number 1, production, number 2, production, number 3.
In the face of all of this, we've heard about countries that go the whole hog to even subsidize production for their key companies in order to ensure that they maintain a steady growth. Now, while not suggesting that, because it would seem this particular administration is not in the business of subsidies, as we have seen from the very first day. While not into that, what would be the key policies that would protect the local industry so that in the face of these huge challenges that they face, that they are confronted with, you do not have a situation where companies from other countries can produce cheaper and can get those goods to come in, therefore pushing the preference of the citizens, not just for foreign goods, but for ones that they seem to think would be cheaper for them in the long run.
Okay, first, Cyril, let me disagree with you slightly. It's not the case that the government of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu is anti-subsidy. It's not the case, because in spite of, the stoppage or withdrawal of subsidy on his first day after being sworn in, a lot of subsidy is actually still going on. Not in that sector, not in the petroleum, and all that. I think that the most common subsidy that everybody knows about is the one that Mr. President stopped. But, if you go to the power sector, right, we may still be complaining today that the tariffs are so high. In spite of being as high, government is subsidizing a great deal. So there is no how any government can be totally, against subsidy. But having said so, you're also right. You're also right, and I think that going forward, these are the kinds of things we're going to confront one by one. Okay. Because you're also correct in the national industrial push that I've begun. Company after company struggling with the myriad of constraints to produce. You still have goods that can't be sold because of the kind of unfair competition that they are faced with foreign produced goods, which come into the country through smuggling and some other means, and they don't pay whatever duties. Now, they enjoy two things. The first is that from the countries they come from, they are subsidized. They are given incentives, which reduces their production cost. Right. And then so it's an unfair competition in the market, in the Nigerian market space. So you're right. Our companies, our producers need a lot of protection. It's on a case-by-case basis. I think government attention is going to be drawn to that. But most of all, there have been some steps taken in the past that should be able to assist all of these. There's Executive Order 3, Executive Order 5, that if implemented would help. One of the mandates that I have is the promotion of made in Nigeria goods and services. And I think that I'm passionate about that mandate. And the next, few weeks and months, what we intend to do is to go beyond lip service and see how we can actually make this to happen. The more it happens, the more it speaks to the challenges of, our producers and manufacturers.
Right. At this point, we'll take a short break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation with our guests, so stay with us on One on One. Why should we be in a difficult situation financially?
Once upon a time we were rich, but we're not a rich country anymore.
Disaster management is everybody's business.
In all these times, the organization turned to Nigeria.
We would as much want to harness the capacity that is within us so that we see how we can become self-reliant.
1 month ended and you said you are increasing warning strike by 2 months. You are incubating madness.
Even if these are officials of government who have been told to go and enforce the law and they have gone against the law itself, they must be held accountable.
One on One, Friday, 10:30 p.m. on NTA Network. It's One on One with the Minister of State Industry, Senator John Enoh. Minister, one of the things you've talked about, you say you're passionate about, is promoting made in Nigeria products and goods and services. Again, there's this aspect of it, which might not entirely be government, driven. The people themselves. One of the challenges we have heard people speak of often is the preference of many Nigerians, particularly of those that used to be referred to as being in the middle and upper class, for goods and services from other climes, which again would now bother on change in attitudes and all that. Do you see that as something that you can effectively fight, especially in these circumstances?
Okay, and I agree with you. Our appetite for foreign-made goods is in the high heavens, right? But I think that it's going to take leadership that is deliberate, that is intentional, that is targeted. I'm going to give an example. I was in Ogun State, and I visited the governor. On this particular day, I found almost everybody wearing adire. And then there was this story, he told me, the state of adire when he came in as governor, how, some other countries, China and all of that had come and, driven the local people, out of the market, What did he do? Just one decision, one policy decision, that on a particular day every week, every government appointee and some other levels of people have to dress on adire. That alone, the market for adire now, the manufacturer and the regional people are back in business. So it's going to take what? It's going to take leadership. What leadership does. It's going to take a lot of advocacy. I believe that one of the reasons why the appetite of Nigerians is as high for foreign-made goods and preference also has to do with the quality of goods as they imagine. So alongside this campaign is going to be what? The campaign for quality goods.
Right.
For quality goods. You're not going to take them separately. I believe, for example, that if Nigerians find out that those made in Nigerian goods are as competitive in terms of quality, I don't think that preference will continue to reduce that preference.
So that might bring us to the matter of ensuring standards. And I'm not quite sure who has oversight over the standards organization now, whether it's the Minister of State Industry or the Minister of Trade and Investment. We're not quite sure where the standards organization falls in. But that is one institution that many Nigerians have spoken out about and wondered just how their activities can be ramped up to ensure standards. Because, as you've said, the question of standards is there with us.
Okay, I'm going to say one or two things. One, to answer you directly, the Standards Organization of Nigeria, SON, is an agency within the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. The other agencies are listed to you, and I didn't finish listing them, are agencies that are directly and wholly under my mandate as Minister in charge of Industry. Now, there are about 3 or 4 other agencies that we have a shared mandate.
Okay.
Right? SON, NEBSA, OGSA, the oil and gas, FCCPC, and in each of these agencies, it's clear enough. It's specified for me in matters of industry. So I supervise and have a mandate over SON on matters of industry. The Minister of Trade and Investment does the same thing on matters of trade and investment. The other thing is that the Standards Organization of Nigeria, yes, that's correct, has that mandate, to regulate standards of products. and all of. About last month, there was some, video that was viral on cables and wires, and all of that, substandards, things, That weekend, what I did was I forwarded the same thing to the Director General of Standards Commission of Nigeria. And before I realized anything, within that weekend, there was a swoop on the manufacturers, right? And company after company were being temporarily shut down, for assessment, all of that. So the Standards Organization of Nigeria is doing its work. The extent of how they succeed also has to do with, the enormity of the Nigerian environment and what, a lot of the times, they come, face to face with a lot of those who are compromising standards and are able to. But outside that, outside what, again, gladly, there's about nothing you want to talk about that there hasn't either been an effort or an attempt in the past to want to cure. In one of the briefings that I had from UNIDO, when they paid me a courtesy call, they called my attention to a national quality policy, right? So all of this continues to emphasize the need for the standards and the quality of products that are in the market that are produced in country. Sun has two programs. One is SunCap. SunCap is for imports into Nigeria, right? And then ManCap is for all products that are exported out of the country, to ensure that there's quality and there's standard. So one of the things that we're also trying to push and to work towards is a national metrology, framework, in terms of weights and measures, because to be competitive enough in, the industrial space globally, we need to be able to, have in place a framework for weights and measures. And we're working on all of these. So all of this in totality, will come in handy and will assist us in terms of that push and that campaign. And hopefully we're going to find it too challenging.
Well, let's take a brief message here and we'll explore further the matter of ensuring standards in locally made products. Right, Minister, there's something I would like to ask you about. It may not necessarily be directly under your purview, but you do hear stories around that sometimes when these products, speaking of standards of goods, that sometimes when these products come in, it's actually Nigerians who go to those countries and say, look, can we reduce the quality by such and such, or even the level by so and so that we can make more money? And those companies acquiesce because the necessary checks are not kicked in back in the country. Have you heard stories like that?
Of course, I've heard of such stories. I have, and I think that, Nigerians, while not, making a case for those set of Nigerians, people are free to do what they want to do. What is important is that we must have a system that has an effective, an effective check and balance system. That becomes a challenge for supervision, a challenge for regulation, and all of that. I've mentioned SunCap. That is work for SunCap, because SunCap is set up to do what? To inspect those goods before they leave the countries they are being imported from. So if Sun, through SunCap, is doing its work properly, then that shouldn't really be a problem. That shouldn't really be a problem. And I think that, some years back here, I remember under Hamid Ali, the former Colonel General of Customs, we had customs people go into the markets in Nigeria, into the car selling markets, car shops, and seizing vehicles and all of that. Nigerians cried foul, because for Nigerians, it wasn't the fault of the car people anymore. They brought them in. But this becomes for me, a different level of that supervision, of that regulation. That substandard goods, are quite a menace. They are quite a problem. They're injurious to health. They continue to undercut our economy and our ability to industrialize. And we must have safeguards to see how we can check this.
What, for instance, would manufacturers be saying to you regarding certain government policies, which they also say would affect their level of production and even pricing? The question of review taxes, and that's why I do see your task as cutting off across different segments. And when you set up these stakeholders groups, what are the manufacturers saying towards that? Because the easy argument is government is raising, the cost of everything is going up. But would the same government now have the grounds to appeal to manufacturers not to do the same and to maintain prices in the face of difficulty in production strategies?
Well, I think that this government, has demonstrated from day one of being pro-business, of being pro-industry, of being pro-manufacturing, and it continues to demonstrate so. I mentioned, to you at the beginning that, Mr. President had made a provision very early in the administration, to get, the BOI, and all of that, to continue to be more effective. Before the 2025 budget was passed into law, Mr. President sent an additional funding request, to the National Assembly. This additional funding request had 500 billion for BOI, just to strengthen its capacity. So you're also correct, and I've also come face to face with that reality. The fact that, government is a big, government is big. Government is divided into, different subsets. And depending on what government wants to achieve at a particular point in time, some policy decisions will be taken. Unfortunately, some of those decisions may just have some kind of negative effect on some other sectors, on some other players. So what it is that the government needs to be open to having to respond, to such possibilities. And this government has shown so. There have been moments, in the past in which there was a certain tariff increase or levy increase of 4% or thereabout, and that was withdrawn, that was suspended, after government's attention was called to it. During the tax bills and the public hearings, we had, first Manufacturers Association of Nigeria had their engagement with the Presidential Committee on Tax, on the view of taxes and all of that, and I think that their inputs were taken into consideration to make sure that what was coming out as law eventually doesn't have such a negative effect on the players. So here and there, I appeared before both the Senate and the House committees, defending and trying to, assist solve some of those issues. So some of them had to do with, have a certain department within the ministry, that is, under me, IID, so government, and I think that I had a session, the chairman of that committee actually came to the office to see me, and we're able to reconcile and resolve a few of those areas that were challenging. So so as those problems come up, and problems will come up, challenges will come, issues will come, but because this government has shown, Mr. President has been everywhere around the world, promoting Nigeria in terms of business, that Nigeria was ready, and I think that he's shown that readiness in terms of the way he's reacted, to most of the issues that have come.
There's just one more issue I take up in just a moment, and it has to do with the question of tariffs as well. So we'll take that after this message. Minister, if I recall correctly, you did talk about the Sugar Council, that you have oversight over that as well. It brings me to the push over the matter of sugar for whatever reasons, including health. Of course, these are things that have been put out across there, where citizens are encouraged to cut down the consumption of refined sugar. And this is reflecting in raising taxes on sugar, products, foods and drinks. Again, it takes us back to the producers and manufacturers who feel that while they're struggling to stay above water, the tariffs would now even drive more customers, patronage, away from them. Some even go as far as talking about job losses in an otherwise saturated labor market. Any considerations on those?
Well, I wonder what consideration there can be, because first I think that the consumption of any good, for that matter, is a matter of choice. Right? It's just like cigarette smoking.
Dangerous to health.
Dangerous. People are smoking.
Yes, but while some countries are restricting that, would you say if, for the purposes of growing your industrial base, you would give let to tobacco companies to produce?
As long as they adhere to all the regulations.
Okay.
And to all the warnings and all of that. That's what it is. We're in a free world, really, as much as possible. And I think that people have rights, so government itself also wouldn't, aim at trying to run people's lives, right? Whatever it is, expose people to the danger. People take their personal decisions. But for sugar, it's even beyond that. It's beyond that to the extent that, as we speak, we are not able to even meet even 1/4 of the demand for sugar in our country. Which is why, for several years now, the ministry has had in place what they call backward integration program. A backward integration program is aimed at, trying to, reduce, tariffs and import duties for some products that come in largely as raw materials, with the hope that with time, those who benefit from such an incentive are able to develop the country's capability in the production of the final product. And this has taken place not just with sugar, there are several other products that are enjoying that. So sugar, beyond, is less a household item compared to it being an industrial item. So industries and all that are going to continue to need, have the requirement for sugar and its related, products and items. So it's, is it in terms of power, in terms of ethanol, in terms of pharmaceuticals and all of that. So sugar is, so rather, what the challenge that I find is that the national sugar, policy that has been on, the last, more than 10 years or so, doesn't seem to have been able to achieve its purpose, because in spite of how much, duties, companies have been exempted from, it's not been reflected in terms of how much, sugar is produced in country, and all of that. I thank God that the present leadership of the National Sugar Development Council, is now tying the quota that is allocated and approved for each of the beneficiary companies to their performance in terms of, what kind of farms, sugarcane farms do they have, in terms of what kind of productive capacity are they able to install, and all of that. It started it last year, and I think that when the DG wrote to me, requesting, a letter to Mr. President for approval of the 2025 quota for these companies. This was demonstrated, and you could see that some gains and some achievement had been recorded. And if it's sustained for 2025, for 2026, in terms of tying the quota allocated to performance in terms of the various criteria and yardstick, would seem to do better in this sector.
Right. Well, we're preparing to wind down on this program, so we'll take one more message and then we'll come back to the minister who's here with us. Well, Minister, we're about winding down, but I find I need to put this question to you. It may not necessarily have to do with the activities of growing Nigeria's industry directly, but the country in general. You were a lawmaker, a senator. How do you respond to feelings that the executive goes on with so many of these things it churns out, supposedly for the good of Nigerians, and the legislature, for some reason, has not performed its functions, its statutory functions of checks and balances, and it's everything Mr. President wants that scales through. How do you respond to that?
You know, Cyril, and I can say this to you. Not only was I in the Senate, I mean, I spent 12 years in the House of Reps. I spent 4 years in my state's House of Assembly. So other than the present job that I have, I've spent my entire political career 4-12-4, in the legislature. What I find continuously intriguing is that, the public thinks that the only way the legislature can be seen to be working is when there are fights between the legislature and the executive. This hasn't worked before. This cannot work. Because the fights and the bickerings can only affect the Nigerian people. Nothing gets done. Nothing gets done. I think that what is more important is that the arms of government may be separate, legislature, the executive and judiciary, but, that separateness doesn't make them to exist in isolation, especially the executive and the legislature. As long as there is good working relationship, as long as, it takes, what it means is that the speed with which some legislations get, out of the National Assembly also enhances the speed of government decision making and all of that. So it's people need to understand that. And whenever you have an executive and the legislature work the way they work in presently, don't forget that for the first time, in Nigeria's history, you have a president who was a senator.
Okay.
You have a vice president who was a senator. Okay. You have a secretary of government who was a senator. You have a chief of staff who spent 16 or more years in the House of Representatives, became speaker as well. All right. So all of this is being brought to bear in terms of what you find going on, and Nigerians should applaud that.
All right. Senator John Enoh, Minister of State Industry, it's been interesting talking to you. We hope you can come again so we can explore more. Thank you.
Why not, Cyril? Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
And that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week we'll be back with One on One. I'm Cyril Stober. Bye for now.